imagine if free will was not what we think it is. It's more about freeing will, and will is an aspect of self, and will doesn't have much of the center stage a lot of the time because who is ego, and ego is predictable because we all understand ego very well, and we are able to predict our actions because we all know ego. But what if we start to shift into other aspects like high? If we shift towards the aspect of high, then we start to become different, and the high mind acts differently, and the high body starts to act quite differently to the ego body or the ego mind. And so ego doesn't understand those types of people, those types of states, that aspect combination. Ego doesn't understand the aspects of high. And I think the more that I venture into this space and identify them for myself and understand them for myself, I'll better be able to explain what's happening, and be able to eventually visualize it in real time on the visual graph that I've created and help you follow along. But yes, when you're in a state of high and you're in tuned to high, there can be high mind and high body. So high body would be a state where you are literally in a high state and you are interacting with things I've mentioned before, foods, textures, sensations of the body, emotions as well. And then high mind is that creative nature, that inspiration, that like blue sky thinking, that realm of interconnectedness with knowing somehow, some form of higher understanding. It's all of that when you're in the high mind. And so the power and the aspect of the mind is empowered to be in a high mind state, right? Because high takes over as one of the primary aspect, as opposed to ego in your sober state default. So when you're in a high mind state, that's when this all comes through. And when I'm in a high body, yeah, I'm doing all that. Now, free will is an interesting point to circle back on, in that there's a lot of contention and there's a lot of debate around free will. And I mean, it depends on if everyone you're talking to has the same understanding of what the words mean and then what the context means. But yeah, if you're talking about the potential to radically shift your states of awareness over to another area, and you literally can document yourself transform, all aspects of yourself start to shift towards a different state, towards a different frequency. In that realm, you are no longer predictable because you are no longer recognized and familiar yet, because it's so radically different from the world that's being created and the whole like enthrallment of experience that's all tied to being in states of the ego, whether it's an ego body state or an ego mind state, or an ego whatever state. It's all ego. And that's the world that we pretty much live in. It's egocentric. It's self-centered. So no matter which way you look at it, that's the way I see it. And when I'm in states of high and I regulate it and I moderate it so that I stay on that just upper frequency. It's not delirium and stuff when you stay within a certain threshold. It's when you get absolutely blasted, you're further into knowing everything and understanding everything, but you are so disconnected from your body and your mind, and you go too far in one direction, too much of a high mind state and a high body state. And that's why society freaks out and goes, well, the high mind state can sound like insanity, and the high body state can look like they are completely with loss of control, and that's dangerous, and that they are, they've lost their wits and they've lost their cognition and they're dangerous. And so we have a very visceral reaction of fear and we want to avoid those two kind of calamities. And we haven't talked about will in all this time. And it's partly to do with my personal kind of more distant relationship with the aspect of will or want. But the more that I keep my awareness open to that end of the spectrum, that side, the more stories are starting to piece together using familiar terms like free will and that talking point. And I'm like, oh, it is almost like freeing will. So when I'm in a higher state, I am able to use the power of high in order to tune out of ego and stay more open to this other aspect and give will a bit of space to breathe and to come to life. And that's done through high, not through ego. Because ego knows himself and can predict the probabilities of things and gives form and boundaries to understandings, meanings, and our very interpretation of what reality is. It's all ego-centered. And because we know ourselves, we think we know everything. If we change ourselves to a different frequency, to a different state, and within that primary state being of high and not ego, we change. And what if in the perception of ego, another more dangerous state of will being the primary aspect, the driving force behind our decisions and our actions and our behaviors, that I'm almost like too scared to go into, the realm of chaos. But it can go chaotically positive or chaotically negative. That's just a perception of ours. But I'll be keeping my mind open to explore what experiences could be within the realm of chaos and will taking the helm. But right now I'm just exploring what it's like when in a state of high, an aspect of high, the aspect of high takes control, and I'm able to experience what it's like to have a high body rather than an ego body, and a high mind rather than an ego mind. And as I tune more and more out of ego and into high and allow my awareness to be focused on the aspect of high and then the states of high, I'm able to document and understand the potential of what does it mean to stay in this space. Examples are like, what does it mean to be aware that your mind is no longer the ego mind, it's a high mind, and you're liberated to think how you want to think without ego constantly taking a hold and saying, you can't think like that, that's crazy, you're stupid, you know, no one will believe you. It's the source of that kind of ridicule, because that's all forms of thought and control and segregation and separation. That's all of ego, and ego has set boundaries between lots of things, and it's an old way of trying to navigate your world and understand your experience. So it's understandable, but that's no longer evident when you're in a higher state. And when you are in a high mind state, your mind can think of like inconceivable, profound thoughts through just simple observation. If you have a curious mind and you just keep your eyes open to the subtleties of society and self, then you are able to see what's been in front of you the whole time. And usually that requires ego to take a seat and let high take control. And in a higher state, ego stays silent. And ego kind of melts away. And when a higher state takes control, once you've practiced to let ego just sit down and not give him the control, because ego loves control, obviously. But once your awareness is choosing to stay within the state of high, and then that is the surgence or resurgence of will going towards high and not will going towards ego. Because I think that's what we fear, that will would be like working for ego. Because that's when you have powerful individuals who rise to the top no matter what, and at the cost of everything else. And yeah, that's where that dangerous ground is. Anyway, right. But in a... I'll prove it. In a high mind state, you're able to conceive this kind of stuff, and it comes out as madness because it's not recognizable within the realms of perception of ego. You literally have to tune out, or at the very least are able to put your awareness and understanding, use the power of your mind, understand these notions and these terminologies and the graphs and the visuals that I'm building, in order to grasp what's going on within yourself at any given time. Where is your awareness? Where is your focus? What is your primary state? Is it of the ego? Is it the ego mind? Is it of the mind and less of the ego? Because the mind has the power to just like completely envelop our whole awareness. All of our focus can be placed in the mind. And we know this to be true, even though mind, as I'm putting it, is not a prime aspect, right? Because the mind doesn't seem to have that more like sentient nature of desire, preference, form. Ego is of that. It's of control and self. The mind is like a supercomputer. It's like a superpower that is able to take on almost a life of its own, because if we just feed it and feed it and feed it, it gets hungrier and hungrier, and we basically just train ourselves to become less aware of the other aspects of self and just let ourselves get completely swallowed up by the mind. And the processes of the mind usually don't involve the body. And so high intellectuals will find that if they allow themselves to fully just get enveloped in the mind, then they become really obsessed with only thought, and none of their physical realities mean much. And it's a bit of a sorry state to be, because it's great to be balanced, but yet they allow themselves to get into that state. And that's just one example of like a heavy mind state, and that's it. But usually it's good to have a balance of different aspects of self. I think I'll bring it to a close. I feel like I'm rambling. It's difficult to not have that kind of like visual social feedback. And then I start to get self-conscious. My awareness is more of the ego again. And I snap back to more of my default sober state where ego is more dominant. And so ego mind is the state that I shift into. And then that's where I start to have those thoughts of you're being ridiculous, no one will believe this, and like those kind of like negative starting to enter if I allow them to take over, which right now I'm on top of. I'm not letting those negative, pessimistic and realistic thought forms come in, because I know that they're from states of ego mind. And it's very limiting. And I am not of limitation. So that's just a little rambling about the aspects of self and my upcoming attempts to visualize them and even start publishing these videos.